Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. Thank you for stopping by, as always. We've uploaded my presentation from Mindspeak over the weekend. That link is on the front page of the website and on Rich Wrap-Ups. So I kind of covered a lot of things, but do have a listen, see if there's something that's of interest, and I welcome any feedback. I said over the weekend that markets may be caught off guard if the Fed hikes rates this week, and indeed that remains the case. Home thoughts. I love this photograph of sunflower fields, Jarrettsville, Maryland, Sergio, Estrellado. And this one again, this photograph is by Sean Jeffers, under the stars at Kea Point, Mount Cook National Park, New Zealand. Here's what we know about why couples get divorced, says Bloomberg. This is, of course, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt. And then I like this, one of the most indelible sights of the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics was Mega Faces by Asif Khan. This kinetic installation depicted millions of selfies turned into 3D reliefs by 11,000 illuminated tubes which moved in and out as they adjusted to the contours of each face. Political reflections. The UN spokesperson quoting Ban Ki-moon yesterday at UNGA: in too many places we see leaders rewriting constitutions, manipulating elections and clinging to power. Ban: protectors must never become predators. Obama, of course, made his final address to UNGA. It was 45 minutes long, the time limit was 15, but obviously a wonderfully uplifting speech as ever. Talking about how humanity is better lifting others up than putting them down. Lots of powerful thoughts as ever. And as I've said previously, I like the way he makes us look up and not down. Hillary Clinton, according to the polls, this is from Holger, very narrow, less than 1%. And as I said over the weekend, if Trump can turn on and turn out his base and Hillary can't, then this is a toss-up. And I said the first thing to observe is that this is a two-horse race. The second thing to observe is that event risk surely favors Trump. International markets, another banking crisis in the making. Deutsche Bank sparks sell-off across the banking sector. Default probabilities jump. Currency markets, we just got the news, but my internet went down, so I haven't been able to follow it in great detail out of Japan, but we'll come to that in a minute. Euro dollar, when I looked last, 111.36. Dollar index, 96.03. Japanese yen, 102.46. Swissy, 0.9792. The pound, 129.59. That's come to an interesting level. Aussie, 0.7550. India rupee, 67.055. South Korean won, 11.1295. The real, 325.83. Egyptian pound, 8.8813. And the rand, which has strengthened of late, 13.8817. This is going to be the most important meeting for the BOJ in quite some time, said Daisuke Kama. And we learned that the Bank of Japan abandoned its base money target and instead set a yield curve control under which it will buy long-term government bonds to keep 10-year bond yields around current levels of 0%. The Japanese 10-year yield rose above zero for the first time since March, as the Bank of Japan introduced QQE with yield curve control. Dollar yen, I'll put up a 5-day chart. Last time I looked, 102.50. Euro dollar, last time I checked, 111.31. But what's interesting is that the euro's historical volatility versus the dollar is now the lowest among G10 currencies, displacing even the Danish kroner, which is pegged to the common currency. 1 month volatility is now 6.14 percentage points, the lowest since September 2014. PRADA's handbag lineup has Macquarie bullish on its shares. Opportunity to put up their handbag. Paul Virilio's wealth is the hidden side of speed, and speed the hidden side of wealth. Worth thinking about. Gold lost trading 13.1158. Key area of support is 13.04. Crude oil got a bit of a fillip. We're now at $44.82 in New York, but I don't see it lasting. It's been in this range actually of 39 to about 50 for a long time. Copper, interesting chart that Aurelia is pointing out. Typically, those wedge formations signal a break either to the upside or the downside. It's binary, but it signals the break is coming as the price narrows. US natural gas rises above $3 per MBTU for the first time in 16 months. It's up 30% year to date. Javier Blas. Urjit Patel is enjoying the best bond market start for a new Reserve Bank of India governor this century. Benchmark 10-year yields have plunged 56 basis points since June 30, the most in any quarter since 1999, during which a central bank chief was appointed. Put up a photograph of the Reserve Bank of India logo at the central bank's headquarters in New Delhi. Let's go to Sub-Saharan Africa. DRC is obviously front and center. A friend of mine said, look, we just don't know. A friend of mine who's in Kinshasa said this just could go anywhere, even talking about a military intervention. US and France threatening the DRC with sanctions after deadly protest, threatened to impose targeted sanctions on senior officials in the DRC after at least 17 people were killed in demonstrations organized by the opposition. The DRC interior ministers said 17 people were killed in Monday's protests, described it as an attempted uprising. Opposition politicians and human rights activists put the death toll as high as 53. Mr. Kabila's second term as leader of one of Africa's most resource-rich countries is due to end on December 19, but he has not said that he is going to step down, and preparations to hold an election have not really started. He's charged Moise Katumbi with hiring mercenaries as part of an alleged plot to topple him. Country's constitutional court has said Mr. Kabila can stay in power until an election is held, without giving a date when that would be. Earlier this month, the government said a national unity government will form later this year. Jean-Marc Ayrault, the French foreign minister, has called it extremely worrying, very dangerous. He said European governments will discuss imposing sanctions. Washington also imposed sanctions on Celestine Kanyama, Kinshasa's police commissioner. The US State Department said it was disappointed at the failure of the DRC's Electoral Commission to stick to the constitutionally mandated electoral timetable, and deeply alarmed by Monday's violence. Outraged by the physical obstruction and verbal aggression directed against Tom Perillo, Washington's special envoy for the region, when he left Kinshasa airport on Sunday. 6th of June, I wrote about how the numbers were building and how Katumbi was at that point the leader of the movement, must have been thinking this might just turn into a tsunami. I think that tsunami might be that tsunami now. And I said down the street as a tinderbox has become a major area of political contestation across the continent, talked about how the revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production, but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and becomes a motor, a machine of attack, becomes, in other words, a producer of speed. And I was asking how many people can an incumbent shoot stone cold dead in such a situation? 100,000, 10,000. And I said, this is another point. There is a threshold beyond which the incumbent cannot go. Where that threshold lies will be discovered in the throes of the event. Look at this chart, world population forecast with Africa's percentage share from 1950 to 2100. Interesting piece in Bloomberg about Silicon Valley as the hot new commodity in Africa. The titans of Silicon Valley are undeterred by the economic slump afflicting much of Africa. Facebook, Google, Oracle, Uber are at the leading edge of the world's frontier markets digital. As the commodity crash buffets the continent's biggest economies, the interest in investments couldn't come at a better time. talking about there's been a big shift from an almost exclusive focus on extractive sectors to those such as consumers and renewable energy. Africa's growth has slowed since 2014, as we know. Investors have adapted by focusing more on the continent's young population and rising middle class as harbingers of opportunity. Kenya is really benefiting in terms of long-term investment. Martina Boradziva, a lot of companies say it is a much more reliable, less vulnerable destination than, say, Nigeria or Angola. Talking about Facebook's visit, only 15% of African adults own a smartphone compared with around two-thirds of Americans. There are plenty of opportunities. Investors need to diversify. It will take time, but they are changing their strategies. They're focusing on manufacturing and construction. Telecommunications is attractive due to the growth of broadband, smartphone penetration. South African all shares at a 6-week low, but up 1.27% this year. Dollar versus rand 6-month chart 13.88. We've seen the rand strengthen on increased risk appetite. Egyptian EGX 30 up 14.88%. This year, Guinness Nigeria posted its first loss in 30 years as downturn weighs. Second biggest brewer posted its first loss in at least 30 years as a downturn in Africa's most populous nation increased costs and cut demand for its brands. That's something. The share price is down 17% this year. Nigeria all share down 1.51% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index down 10.97% this year. Like this photograph, into the Okavango. Good morning. Today we make our last push for Mao and then close out Okavango 16. Botswana at 50, the end of an African success story. Our conversation saying it may be reasonably depicted as a United Kingdom that triumphed because of its inspiring message of interracial unity. Nonetheless, the portrait of success is outdated. It is unlikely to be revived for future anniversaries without substantial improvements in economic progress, human rights, and social justice. Put up a photograph of the president. The Central Bank of Kenya caught most people off guard, cut rates 50 basis points yesterday. Take a look at the announcement. That links on Rich Wrap-Ups. I wrote, in a response to Reuters, the governor spoke to a benign inflationary trajectory, a stable and even Teflon shilling, a muscular reserves position, and most importantly, what looks like a standstill in credit growth since last year. Therefore, the cut was justified. Furthermore, the governor had spoken of the banks making a down payment a few weeks ago. This 50 basis point cut was the central bank's down payment. The point is, private sector loan growth is at 7.2% in July from 21.4% a year ago, and I think that's what's signaling a slowdown in the economy. Bloomberg, the ruptions in the financial sector and the obstacles to credit expansion are likely to be viewed as a greater threat than inflation at the moment. It's going to be a bumpy ride ahead for the banking sector, said Gibran Qureshi. We see credit growth contracting even further. This will compromise the central bank's ability to manage inflation. We expected them to take time to understand the transmission of the rate cap, which is what I thought. Bloomberg gadfly, Kenya bashes its bankers. The frontier market of Kenya isn't often on US or European investors' radar. It should be. It offers a timely reminder of financial markets' complacency about the risk of populism and the attractiveness of bashing banks to win votes. East Africa's most advanced economy has introduced a law setting a cap on commercial lending rates and a floor on deposit payout rates, an instant squeeze on margins that sent shares of Kenyan banks to their lowest in years. Investors were clearly unprepared for a measure designed to make banks poorer or less greedy, depending on your point of view. In the face of what Kenyan President Kenyatta described as ordinary citizens' frustrations about the cost of credit and earnings from deposits. There's no denying Kenyan banks make rich returns. The country's largest bank by assets, KCB, has a return on equity of 24.7%, according to Bloomberg data, Rivals Co-op and Equity are on 24.5% and 26.9%. That's not just leagues ahead of the 5 to 7% ROE at Europe's biggest banks. It beats the 15 to 18% at South Africa's top lenders. Market concentration may have something to do with it. Kenya's 7 biggest lenders, there are about 43 in total, hold 80% of the banking system's cash. Capping interest rates risk damaging the economy and stunting credit growth, a danger not lost on officials of the country's central bank and finance ministry who oppose the measure. If banks stop catering to anyone but the safest credit risk, it may encourage shadow banks or dodgy lenders to step in. If smaller banks find it harder to make ends meet, they may get bought up, making those dominant banks even bigger. And the new loan cap at 4 percentage points above the base central rate sets a potentially unreasonable ceiling for Kenya's risk premium, according to investment firm Saipem. So why take a chance? Well, next year's election and the bank bashing law may be just the ticket to win votes. Some analysts reckon it's a purely populist move, yet the sell-off of Kenyan bank stocks over the past month suggests markets weren't adequately prepared for this risk, with the chorus of credible dissenting voices perhaps lulling investors. And while it's easy to dismiss this as a kind of problem specific to emerging markets, there are echoes of the anti-elite vibe in Europe, and the US championing the banks in particular isn't much of a vote winner. The US election has put the restoration of Glass-Steagall back on the table, with the Republicans calling for big banks to be broken up. Philip Hammond is trying to put a protective arm around the city. Don't forget that Brexit itself caught investors on the hop. I'm deeply disappointed I missed this, really did. I thought the president's bona fides in this matter were already proven, but I didn't realise that the political issue would become front and centre. EcoBank researcher George Bodo said return on equity, the profitability generated for each share will reduce from the current average of 18% to 10%. I like this photograph of a village near Okavango, Kenya, on the shores of Lake Turkana. This is Sergio Estrellado again. The Kenya shilling reasonably firm this morning, but let's see how it develops. 101.254. Nairobi all share down 9.17% this year. NSE 20 down 21% this year. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I will be taking a leave of absence for about 10 days from tomorrow.